Hello everyone, I'm Sohini Roy, Product Manager at Ubuntu for WSL, and we're thrilled today to do a demo of Beekeeper Studio and do an introduction to the Electron framework and how it can support you for building cross-platform desktop apps. And joining me today will be Hayden Barnes, if you can say a quick hello.
Hey, glad to be here. My name's Hayden Barnes. I'm the developer advocate for Ubuntu on WSL.
Great, and our guest speaker today, who will be running this awesome demo, would be Matthew Rathbone.
Hello, I'm Matthew.
Hey, Matthew.
I'm the co-founder of Beekeeper Studio, and I'm going to walk you through how to make Electron apps on WSL.
Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about Beekeeper Studio.
So Beekeeper Studio is a cross-platform SQL editor and database management app. It's built mostly on WSL2 using Ubuntu. It looks really good. You can run SQL queries against databases. You can look at your database data, filter it, do all the sorts of SQL databasey things that you like. It's totally cross-platform and open source. So it's just free. Anyone can get it. It runs on Linux, Windows, and Mac. So that's Beekeeper Studio. And it's built on the Electron framework, which is what I'm excited to show you about right now.
Yeah, tell us a little about Electron.
Yeah, so Electron is a desktop framework that lets you build applications using web technologies. So in this example, Beekeeper Studio is a Vue Js app, and it runs on Electron natively. It doesn't look like a web app, and it has keyboard shortcuts like Control-Tab, just like normal desktop apps, but it's just totally all JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So it's really easy if you're a web developer or honestly anybody who knows any of those technologies to just jump in and make a desktop app pretty quickly.
So tell us more about what you're going to show us today. What will someone be able to do at the end of their time with us?
All right, so I've got a blog post that should have gone out by the time this video comes out. Ignore the URL. It's the preview URL. I'm going to walk through basically what I put in this blog post. So we're starting off with a totally fresh installation of Ubuntu 20.04 on Linux using WSL. And by the end, you should be able to start your desktop app on the Linux side and have it display in Windows with a full dev environment up and running and all the things installed that you need. So I'm going to be walking through this presentation to do that.
So Matthew, are you able to build versions for both Windows and Linux at the same time?
Sort of. So because it's on WSL, you're natively in the Ubuntu environment. So by default, you're building a Linux package. You can then build Windows packages in two ways. You can either have a copy of the code in Windows land and then build it with the Windows Node.js and the Windows binaries, or you can actually install Wine on Ubuntu 20.04 in Windows and build a Windows installer in Linux on Windows, which is kind of wild. I'm not going to walk through that, but I will get it to the point where it'll build a Linux binary.
Excellent. Now, why did you choose Ubuntu on WSL?
So I've been software development for over 10 years. I mostly just work in Unix-style shells with Bash and all the Bash tooling that I'm used to. I spent a lot of time working on desktop Linux, but most recently running my own business, I need to be in Windows a lot of the time because some of the software I need is only in Windows. And so WSL2 is the best way for me to get a dev environment running that I'm familiar with right in Windows, right? Without having to buy a really expensive Mac or have a VM or do a bunch of other stuff that's not very fun. So it's just a really nice way to get up and running with Linux. But cool. It's not without some fiddly bits, which I will go through in here if you're building desktop apps.
Sure.
That's probably the key of what we'll get to today. I think the audience will love the fiddly bits the most from all of this.
Yes, exactly. All right, so this is a totally fresh Ubuntu 20.04 installation. The uptime is 4 hours because I just checked 4 hours ago that it worked. I have no tools in here. I have no node. I have no anything, right? So I'm just going to take you through basically just starting from scratch. So this blog post will be available afterwards. I'm really just going to cheat and copy commands that I've written on my blog post into the terminal so that I can test them. The first thing we're going to do is set up a Node.js environment. So Electron runs in Node.js. That is the first thing you'll need. So we're going to just use regular old Linux package manager and update. Oh no, this is going to take a long time. We've tested this before. It shouldn't take too long. So have get update all the packages, make sure we've got up-to-date package listings, and then we're going to install Node.js, Git, and NPM. From there, we will install Yarn. NPM and Yarn are package managers for Node.js. I like using Yarn because it's better, but that's a subjective opinion, and can you hate mail? Thank you. All right, so we've got update in Windows. So here's a little tip. If you're in WSL2 and you want to paste, you can right-click, but if you're in a tmux window, you have to hold Control to paste. So hold Control and then right-click. So this is going to install a whole bunch of stuff to get Node.js set up. All right, it's going to be pretty quick. Something to take note of, like you want to make sure that you're in WSL2 for this and not WSL1, because WSL1's a lot slower. How do I do that? How do I do the version? Is it -p? Yeah.
Yep.
WSL -list -v in PowerShell, and you can see I'm running in version 2 of WSL, which is where you want to be.
Excellent. And that shows the ability to run multiple versions of Ubuntu at the same time in WSL.
Yeah, that's right. I can show that again because I cut
We
that up
noticed
pretty
the
quick.
1804 and the 2004 running together.
Yeah, so I actually did all my development on 1804 because I built this over the last year and 2004 wasn't out. But who wants to do a demo with the last LTS release?
How boring.
Exactly.
Exactly. So maybe I should have installed this stuff before the demo, but this is going to go nuts. So let me just kind of walk you through what I'm going to do.
It's nice because it's
once we've
authentic.
installed,
Yeah.
it is authentic, yes. This is an authentic demo. We can edit this out. Here's a Node installation we did earlier. Once we've installed Node, we're going to get, I'm going to be setting you up with a Vue Js Electron app. So Vue Js is a web framework. JavaScript is similar to React or Angular, but it's a bit more simple and it has a really great command line tool, which makes Electron apps really easy. Electron apps are like fiddly to set up manually, but it's really easy with Vue because you just basically run one command and it gets all set up for you. So I'm going to be running through the Electron setup with Vue, and then we'll walk through what you need to do to get to view Windows on Windows from Linux. Actually, I'm going to kill this because this is kind of a sneak peek as to what I need to do later. So hopefully in a second, this install will be finished. Excellent. So we have Node installed right now, and we're going to want to install Yarn, which is the package manager du jour, and Node.js. Great. So I'm in a nice fresh home directory. I'm going to start setting up my Electron app. Now, we're not done installing things. So because this isn't desktop Ubuntu, we don't have a bunch of the packages that you would normally have with like Top Manager for Ubuntu. So I have to install a bunch of packages to let Electron compile. So I'm going to do that. And again, this list is on the blog, another 200 megs, but this one should be a little bit quicker. It's just a bunch of native libraries, basically. So these are just things like the GTK bindings, right? So GTK3 bindings and whatever these other bindings are. I'm not actually exactly sure what they all are, but they're important so desktop apps can actually run and they have an X environment to run in. We're going to run Yarn global add Vue CLI. So this is the Vue client that we're going to be using. So hopefully we can zoom through
running this on WSL2 makes the install process so much faster for all these packages.
Yeah, in fact, if you try and do this, a lot of this stuff on WSL1, it won't. Like Node.js in particular has a lot of trouble with installing a lot of packages on WSL1 because it's not a native file system. This stuff will all work, but it'll just, like in my experience, this stuff works fine. It just takes a long time. But the Yarn installation of packages just never really resolves. You hit a lot of timeouts. I think it does a lot of file systems. All right, so there's those packages. And then finally, we're going to install the Vue CLI. So this is authentic. So if I mess something up in my blog post, you guys are going to help me edit it because I'll have to change it to make it work. Hopefully it all just works.
So Electron is the first framework you're using, and then within that you have Vue Js. So what
Yes.
do each provide?
So Electron provides you the way to make your web apps look like a native app. So this is right.
Okay.
This is Beekeeper. It's not in a browser. It has its own window controls. It can have its own file menu, just like a regular app. So, for example, VS Code is built in Electron and is a desktop application. So within the desktop application, you have to draw all these things and like change tabs when you click the buttons. JavaScript. And Vue is the JavaScript library I'm using to do my interactive element.
Right. Because
This
we
could
hear
just be,
Electron App. Sorry.
yeah,
Because we hear
carry on.
Electron App and we think Electron apps are just one thing, but there are multiple choices of toolkits within Electron you can use, like Vue.js, to provide that app-like functionality. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you could just have it be a static HTML page if you liked, and that would work in Electron too. It wouldn't be very useful, but it would work. All right, so we have our Vue CLI. So the Vue CLI is this little command line tool where you literally just write Vue on the command line, and it can help you set up a project. So for any of you who used to develop Ruby on Rails apps, there's like the Rails binary where you would say Rails new project, and it would set up Ruby on Rails for you in a directory. Vue does basically the same thing. We're going to create an app with the default settings called My App, and then we're going to add a Vue client plugin called Electron Builder, and then we're going to use that to build and launch an Electron app. So Vue create default My App. It's going to create a directory called My App. It's going to bootstrap it with a yarn file and all the other things that it needs. Like I'm missing
So you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that you were mostly accustomed to a Unix-style terminal.
Yes.
If it weren't for WSL, what would you be using to get that experience?
So I dual boot Windows and desktop Ubuntu 2004.
Sure.
So usually for the last 6 years, I've pretty much exclusively worked in an Ubuntu desktop. But my work situation has changed so that I can't do that anymore. So when I can, I jump over to there. But honestly, I spend most of my time in Windows with WSL 2 because it's just a much easier way for me to jump into a Linux environment without having to reboot, which is nice. You can actually build Electron apps in PowerShell too, but it's a bit more finicky because you don't have bash, you don't have like grep and all those other command line tools, and some native dependencies don't work so well. So I prefer to build it in Linux and then figure out the Windows bit later. So we now have My App, which has a nice little project set up here. And I'm going to kind of jump out this demo a little bit and show Visual Studio Code has a special code server for WSL. So you can edit code. All right, let me step back. So one of the big things that I had trouble adapting to with WSL is that it doesn't really live in Windows. It's like a separate OS that is inside Windows, but they're really totally separate. So if I open the Finder, like it's not just like a folder in here that I can go to. It's not so easy to do. I think they added the ability to get to it from here, but it's like it's really a separate file system with a separate everything, right? Like separate CPU resources, like the separate network, the two don't communicate, they can't share firewalls, all that stuff. So if you want to edit files inside of Linux in Windows, you have to use either a native Linux editor or VS Code has this great little remote connection thing. So here it says I'm connected to WSL Ubuntu 2004, and I've opened that folder inside of VS Code. So if you're in VS Code, like if you use VS Code, this just looks like normal VS Code, but it's running in Ubuntu 2004. Now the negative of that is you have to install all of your like plugins again inside of that container, but other than that, it just works normally. So this is the Vue app that's got set up. Oh, sorry, Hayden. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. There is some integration there. I mean, you can mount your C drive, and in more recent versions of Windows, like on the Insider Fast Ring, you have a Linux option in your Quick Actions menu on the left in Explorer for those folders. So
Yes.
you're right, it is a separate file system, but there's improvements in how you can reach those files, like the code extension, like the improvements coming in Explorer, and you can even mount those folders as drives if you needed to in Windows. So there's ways around that.
Yeah, it's way better. Actually, one thing that I like to do is, this is my 1804. So to get to Windows from Linux, you have to go through Mount, C, and then like navigate the file system here.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, that's my username here. What I like to do is make a symlink. I think I'm doing the symlinks right. Symlink like that. So I have a Windows directory inside my home directory on WSL, which is pointing at my home directory in Windows. It's really easy to get to. That's one thing I like to do. All right, so I've got this set up. My Vue installation is. Oh, okay, reload required. Okay, so I've installed a Vue extension into VS Code just so you can get some text highlighting while I'm showing you this. So we've got a basic Vue Js app set up right now. This is literally the default Vue app. From here, we're going to add Electron Builder, which is how we're going to build our Electron project. No? Vue add Electron Builder. So this is a plugin for Vue that will allow the Vue client to directly build and launch Electron with all of your code webpacked and bundled inside it. So this will just do its regular install, link dependencies, and then we'll do a yarn install, and then we'll run our Electron app and we'll see what happens. What's going to happen? It could be exciting. Electron version, which one do we want to use? So this is now the plugin asking us which version we want. 9. Just install some dependencies. It's going to add all of the native modules that need to be built into Electron automatically, so we don't have to worry about native package builds. And then when this is built, we'll be good.
Have you found WSL, particularly WSL2, to be stable for your production work?
Yeah, super stable. I use it pretty much all day, every day, so it's great. It never really falls over. The only thing it does do is sometimes eat a lot of memory. But that doesn't really happen with this. It happens with the Docker. But this VM memory thing will keep going up if you're using a lot of VM memory. This is because of my other WSL2 instance here with a bunch of Docker images running. So even with like 5 databases running in Docker, I'm still only at 4 gigs.
Wow.
But yeah, overall really stable.
The only difference between WSL1 and WSL2?
Yeah, it's like you can't even do this with WSL1.
Just for the audience, one more time.
Yeah, no, it really is a big difference. The Vue Electron plugin adds a bunch of commands that you can run, either build or make a dev server for your Electron app. What should happen is this should launch an app. But it didn't, womp womp. Why is that? So the reason the app doesn't launch by default is because Linux has nowhere to like display a window. So by default, there'd be a desktop environment for Linux. We don't have one, right? We're in Windows. But there are plenty of little plugins for Windows that allow Windows to accept application windows from the Linux environment. So what we need is called an X server. So X is the window manager for Ubuntu. Terminology wrong. I'm sorry. So we're going to install something called Vcx Server, which is a little app that'll provide an X server. And I've copy and pasted the screenshots into the blog post for how to configure this and get it working. Because it's a little fiddly and I had to jump through Stack Overflow a little bit. I know they're testing now inside of Microsoft a built-in Windows server for Windows. This hopefully by this time next year, so this is 2020 June, hopefully by June 2021, you guys won't have to do this anymore.
And we should know more details about that towards the end of this year.
That'd be great. VCSX
Yep.
server. VCSX. Okay. I don't know where that executable's gone, but I have this config. I'm not going to go through this configuration, but these are the settings when you open a new you open VCSX server for the first time. You basically want to select exactly what I've put here, and this additional parameters for VCSX server is important. I have a pre-built. When you do that, you'll be able to save it as a config, and I have that saved. Yes, yeah. You save a little config.xlaunch, so I'm going to open it here. Maybe I can just do it from the command line, actually. No, never mind. Okay, so if we get VCSX server running, we can test it in, we can test our WSL instance. We install the X11 apps. And we do one extra thing, and that is Ubuntu doesn't know where to look for the display server. So if I try and run Xcalc right now, which is the calculator app, it's probably not going to work. No, can't open display. After much Googling, I figured out this is the best thing to do is you add these two lines to your bash RC file. So, or your bash profile rather. Like that.
And you can also find these commands on the WSL page on the Ubuntu wiki. So hopefully future users don't have to Google too much.
Now if I run Xcalc, ta-da, it's so beautiful. Pretty weird resolution. There we go. And there we go. We have the lovely X calculator, which let's compare this to the Windows calculator. Be good.
Yeah.
We now have an X server running in Windows, and this app, it just behaves like a native Windows app, right? Like it's responsive, it feels pretty good. And that means we can also use this to of our Electron app. So now what should happen is it'll build our JavaScript assets, it'll build the Electron binary, and it'll launch our app window. Here it is. Because it's a web browser, you get the Chrome DevTools right here, but you can close those, and then there you go, my app. It's the Electron app. So this is a fully working Vue Js app running in Electron in Linux on WSL2 on Windows, and it has hot reloading and everything you would ever want in here. So if we want to just change this and be like text, this can now hot reload. Oh, okay, here we go. Hi there.
There you go.
Just reloads on its own. So that's it, really. I mean, that's kind of the app working. Now, the second part of this is editing the files. So I've talked about VS Code, but if you don't use VS Code and you use something like Sublime Text, how do you edit files? So, like if I open the Windows Sublime Text now, you're going to see, oh, actually, this is not a secret file. Fine. And I go to try and open that folder in WSL, like, where is it? Like, it's hard to find it. Oh, yes, I know I'm missing something. Like, you can't really find it. Like, soon you'll be able to see the Linux distros in this quick bar, but even then, like, editing across that is like editing on a network drive, so it's not ideal. So rather than doing that, you could just launch the Linux version of Sublime Text or whatever editor that you want from Linux. Ooh. Cool. So if we kill this, we killed our app. So we could do try gedit. Does that work? This is off script.
Oh yeah, gedit works.
So we installed gedit. And then we could use gedit as our editor right in Windows straight from WSL. But to do that, you need to have your X server running. If you don't have this running, then you're not going to be in a good place. The one thing I had to do with this X server is prevent it from scaling up windows. If you've got a high DPI screen, you're going to have to do some futzing to get that good. I've included kind of a little guide on how to do that in this blog post, which I'll link to at the end. There is a paid X server called X410 that just handles high DPI upscaling correctly, so you can just use that. But otherwise, the Windows release is going to add the Windows server to Windows itself. We'll fix that.
What it sounds like is you have a lot of flexibility here. You can run on Windows and Linux. You can build for both from WSL. You can run and edit your files either with this remote extension in code or natively, what we would call native in Sublime, with X.
Yeah, exactly.
And
like
nothing
from
is
my
like,
perspective, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, it's a delay. It's okay. So nothing sounds like it's too challenging. It's just a matter of getting everything set up, to get your preferred workflow. It's not done for you, but once it's created, you can then just start working.
Yes. The biggest difficulty I had was like understanding that they are two separate platforms running on the same computer. Once I started thinking about it that way, like in my mind, I expected them to be more integrated. So, and that's definitely the direction they're going with it, but it's a new system, right? So in my mind, I expected more of that integration right off the bat. Whereas in reality, you have to do a few things like set up an X server and just have an understanding about the file systems being different. And once you've kind of got around those things, it all just works, really. I mean, most of what I do is inside the Bash shell with VS Code editor editing the files in Linux. So it's my 100% day-to-day workflow. So yeah, it works great.
One of my favorite tidbits is if I need to cat a file, which is display a file that I plan to copy and paste somewhere, is I just pipe it directly to clip.exe, and it will copy it directly to your Windows clipboard.
Wait, you can do
and
that?
paste it.
I didn't know you could do that, because that's actually a real pain
Yep.
in like regular Ubuntu.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can open gedit, check it out. I mean, it's not the sexiest Windows app, but yeah, this is gedit running inside of WSL using the X server. So like, if we kill this, like just you kill that, all your windows disappear. So just to give you a sense of what that's doing. Fantastic. It even got the icons work right, which is kind of nice. Click open in a Linux app, you're going to get like the Linux file picker, and all of these files are going to be inside like your Linux file system, which is why I make this Windows folder. So if I want to open something on Windows, I can just jump into Windows and do it. It makes it really easy to jump into Windows. But other than that, I can just open our Vue app and edit it just how you would normally. And so I'm not going to go into like the details of like what's in all these files as part of Electron. Like that's kind of beyond the scope of this. But broadly, that's kind of everything. If I check my blog post.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your approach to debugging and testing in this environment.
Yeah, so I'm not the most sophisticated debugger with everything. So I typically just the nice thing about Electron is it's just a web environment. So you can do all the stuff that you can do in Chrome when you're debugging a web app. So if I start Electron serve again and serve up the Electron window, most of the code is on the front end. So most of it you can just debug inside Web Debugger just like you would in Chrome. So oops. And this even installs the Vue. Does it install the Vue DevTools view? Might have to be something. It's supposed to. But any kind of debugging that you usually do in JavaScript, you can do here, because this is basically just a Chrome window. It runs Chromium behind the scenes. Look at all the sources on here, and have a look at all the Webpack files. If you haven't used Webpack, this is going to be a little confusing, but here's an app.vue file. Oh, is that the compiled one? Hang on a second. They told you it was confusing. Right, so here's, well, it's not exactly. Oh man, this is linking this demo.
So Matthew, can you tell us a little bit about your approach to debugging in this environment?
Yes, so at a basic level, these Electron apps are just JavaScript apps, right? So we can open our dev server, and we'll have the native Chrome debug tools installed right inside the app. So I showed this a little bit earlier. So you can do everything you normally would in a web app. You can select an element and you can edit it if you really want. It's just a website, right? The nice thing about the Vue CLI is that it lets you install the Vue dev tools. So this file, this background.js, is just dropped here by the Electron plugin. So if you look in source, there's now this, as well as main.js, which is your Vue app, there's background.js, which is the Electron side Node.js code. So it runs two processes, background and main. So in here, we have control of the Chromium window. You can have this install, that's not how you want comment. You can have this install Vue DevTools into the Chromium window so that we can do some extra good debugging. If I uncomment this line out, there's a comment in here that says that Vue DevTools are broken in Electron 6 and greater. That was fixed in 8.2.5, I believe. And it was only ever a problem for Windows 10 dark mode dev Electron Windows. So it was never really a problem for Linux. All right, so now we have our new app instance, and we have the Vue debug tools here now. So these are fantastic because they let you inspect the components inside your Vue app and see all the properties and all the data on them. And then if we go and edit hello world, so this is not a Vue JS demo, but we can say like add that property in, and then this will appear in the hello world. Oop. It'll also tell you if oh wait, I did this wrong. It'll also tell you if you made a mistake, which is nice because I make a lot of mistakes. Indenting, right? Great. And now the Hello World app has this data property. Hello there. We could use this in our Vue JS app in regular development. We can put it in here. That'll get dropped in there. And we can edit this however we like.
Connect the dots for me between this toolkit and what your goals were for Beekeeper Studio.
So there are two of us working on Beekeeper Studio. It's a pretty substantial app. If I open Beekeeper and show you, it works on 3 platforms. It supports like a whole number of different databases, right? SQLite, MariaDB, Postgres, like loads of different databases. To be able to support this, let me just open it. Able to support all these databases and add all these features using a native app framework, it's just impossible with 2 people in their spare time. Like this is not our job. This is literally something we do on the weekends and evenings. It took us a whole year to build this with that time. So for us to be able to build a desktop app is basically impossible without Electron or something similar to it. So it's really enabled us to be able to build this app. And it's enabled a lot of people to build a lot of great apps. Like VS Code is all Electron. I mean, for any of you worried about running a web technology in a desktop app and how heavyweight that might be, if any of you have used VS Code, you know it's a very competent piece of software, and that whole thing is built in Electron. So it is very much able to produce software that millions and millions of people can use every day without issue. And actually, this is a fun thing in VS Code. If you go to help, you can do the developer tools just like I did on my app, right? And like these menus up here, these are all just divs, HTML. So you can kind of explore VS Code a little bit. Maybe there's some good ideas you could steal for your app hidden away in VS Code. But I kind of like to show this as it is open source. I like to show this as a, this is what it, like, this is a web app. It looks like this and millions of people use it. So it's a great platform.
So you were able to build a full-featured desktop application for multiple platforms with a 2-person team, nights and weekends, that handles all of these databases.
Exactly. And, even in our quick demo here, while this is not a very useful app right now, this will build a Linux binary that can be, I can build a snap package right now to upload to the Snap Store. I can build a DEB file, an RPM file, and an app image. We really only spent about 10 minutes building this app. So that's really how quick you can go from having absolutely nothing to having a binary that you can ship to someone. And that's pretty good.
Before we go, are there any important gotchas? I think you've touched on a couple, like making sure you have an X server for those GUI apps. Are there any others you could add?
That's a good question. So I have a little list of gotchas on the blog post that I will share after this, which this blog post basically goes through what I talked about in the video, but without you having to listen to me all the time. So there's a few things that I found a little confusing. A lot of them I've touched on. X Windows, like, they don't totally behave like native Windows. Like, if I suspended my laptop right now, disconnected this call, all these X windows would close. So this would disappear, even though the process would still be running in my terminal. It would disappear, and VS Code would disconnect. The way to solve that is pretty easy. You just restart Electron and let VS Code figure out how to reconnect. It'll just do it on its own. But it is something, if you have a lot of windows open, just know that they will disappear when you suspend your laptop. High DPI screens, probably just better paying for the X410 display server. I haven't paid for it because I don't have a high DPI screen. So I don't have this problem of Windows looking really nice. And if you have a separate firewall, like if you have a corporate firewall in Windows that's configured via a script or via some like Cisco app, WSL is not going to know how to use that, and so you'll have to manually set a proxy on the command line. So you have to manually kind of figure that out, which is not great. And the last thing, which I talked about a little bit, is the memory issue. So if you go to Task Manager, the way I always find out if it's WSL, so here you can see our memory's gone up a little bit because we're doing a lot of JavaScript stuff. From my understanding, right now Windows doesn't know how to reclaim memory from this process. I think that's coming in a future update. So the way you would need to reclaim this 5 gigs of memory is by killing the WSL instance. So to put a caveat on this, I've had to do this maybe twice in the last year, and neither of those times have been related to my building of an Electron app. Mostly it's to do with Docker desktop using all the memory. So what I showed you today is not even going to use 5 gigs. This is because I have several apps open. I'm doing a demo and doing a bunch of stuff. This will probably never be a problem for you. But if it is, just know you can go into PowerShell and then restart them somehow. I think restart command in here. Oh boy, in here to
just dash D.
Dash D. Okay.
But memory compaction is being tested now for Windows insiders. And you can also now set a defined limit on memory usage for WSL in your .wsl config file in your home folder. Right. So there are some options and settings come to smooth over some of these rough edges.
Yeah, I've been using this since like the first Windows Insider preview, right? So I've seen a lot of rough edges, but generally it's really stable, and I think it's great. So I'm very excited for the new changes for sure. And other than that, like those are pretty much my only gotchas. It's really all Windows integration. It's not Ubuntu. Like Ubuntu 2004 on WSL is exactly Ubuntu 2004.
So Matthew, can you tell us a little bit about building your application?
Yeah. So the Vue plugin that we installed added a bunch of build commands, package.json, if you know anything about JavaScript. So we have build, which is just regular web app building, but we now have Electron Build as well as Electron Serve, which is what we were using to serve our development version. So if we run, we do yarn run Electron Build, by default, this will build all of the default Linux packages. So I think by default, it'll build a snap file, an app image, a DEB file, and an RPM. But for some of those, you require a bit of extra information, like add in your email address to the package.json. So for this demo, we'll just do --Linux, and we'll build an app image just to kind of demonstrate the build process. And we've added literally zero configuration to this setup. And through these amazing open source plugins, it'll just work and build us a nice app image we can run. And the same is true for a snap package, although you can't test that on WSL2 right now. And the same is true for a DEB file if you add a bit of author information to your package.json. You can also, in Linux, build a package for Windows, but it does require you to install some extra dependencies. So it talks a little bit about it here. And honestly, even the Electron Builder website, which everyone should know about this site, electron.build, even they recommend doing it in Docker, so you don't have to install like a gigabyte of 32-bit dependencies in your shell. But once you have Wine, basically you can build a Windows binary. So, all right, so our build is... So macOS you have to build on Mac. So the nice thing is, if you're building an open source app like I am, and you're hosting on GitHub, GitHub has built-in like CI/CD process. So does Azure as well. So does AWS. You can use all of those. All of those have a built-in macOS like worker type. And so literally to build it on Mac, you would just do --Mac. And it would build your DMG file for macOS. But you can't do that on Linux. You have to be on that platform to do it because of the native dependencies of Electron. But what we did, it's this dist Electron folder. What we did is we built this app image here because you can just execute. You can say I've already built a snap package just to test it works. We can just execute myapp.appimage, and this will just start the production app. So this is the built package. You could email this app image to a friend if they're also on Ubuntu 20.04, and they can just run it and use it on their desktop.
Excellent.
So yeah, it's pretty easy. So I really recommend using the Vue CLI add-in. There's lots of ways to build Electron apps. You can do it your own way, but I recommend using the CLI.
Great.
All right. Yeah. And like I said, I also run Ubuntu desktop, right? So when I'm not in Windows using WSL, I'm using Ubuntu 20.04 properly.
And of course, Beekeeper Studio is in the Snap Store. And,
it is in the Snap Store.
Yeah, great app.
Yeah, so that is actually one caveat is you can't test your Snap package in WSL2.
Right.
For now. But you can, for now. Yeah.
So Matt, what's next for you? What will you be testing next? What are you going to work on next?
We're going to keep building our app and trying to make it the best SQL and database app that no money can buy.
It's certainly a lot better than some of the GTK2, database browsers that you find in some repositories. Much nicer, easier to work with.
Yeah, and actually I think that's something that works in favor of using web tech. I think it's easier to build like a modern UI without having to wait on the various native platforms to catch up what a native UI looks like, or what a good native UI looks like. So, a lot of database administration tools are all in Java, right? And they kind of look like Java Swing applications from the late 90s. We really just wanted to make something fresh. So we're really happy. People seem to love it so far. We're really happy about that. So we'll be just spending the next year building up features and making it better and better and better.
And you're getting community contributions now too, right?
We are, yeah. Actually, at the time of this call, we just I just released a version of Beekeeper Studio that has almost no code in it that I've written. There's only almost entirely contributions from the community, like new features like this multi-run button is a community feature. Other stuff in here are community features, like the colors for your connections and all the things that people wanted in the SQL app. They've been adding, so we've been really, really impressed by that. Actually, like totally blown away, to be honest.
Very cool. And it happened, at least in part, because of Ubuntu on WSL. And we're happy about that too.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really be able to build this in Windows. Like for a little bit of background, I've had this uses Postgres under the hood, and the native Postgres libraries are very difficult to get set up on a Windows dev environment. So without WSL2, I really wouldn't have built this app.
All right, Matthew, thank you so much for showing us that. Where can we find out more?
Yeah, so everything I've talked about in this walkthrough, I'm publishing in a blog post on the Beekeeper Studio website, which is beekeeperstudio.io, or if you Google for Beekeeper Studio, pretty much we're the first thing. We have a blog link here, and that'll take you to the building a cross-platform Electron app in Windows with WSL2 and Ubuntu. That'll be right on there. So everything I've mentioned today, including the gotchas and a special and very important configuration section that may or may not involve dark mode, is on this blog post too.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Any ideas for those in the audience of other demos that you'd like for us to do, or requests to actually join Hayden and myself for a similar blog post or demo, do let us know. We're excited to chat and keep the conversations going. Thank you.